Ahoy! I am very excited because we have very good news today. The Sandworm is getting adjustments. You may remember that I was talking about how I think the Sandworm is not ideal yet at the moment, because not only was it in some ways too easy, but also in other ways it punishes worse groups by making it harder for them. So, it seems like that will be adjusted. We're gonna jump in the middle of things they talked about because I kinda wanna talk about the adjustments first. So what they said they wanted the raid to be is basically pushing into traditional raid territory. They wanted to have a tank, an off-tank, a healer, a range DPS, melee DPS, the typical stuff, with the different roles having different tasks. Then they wanted to use pressure plates in order to empower your team and weaken the boss, and give you additional buff mechanics from mobs as well. One thing that was very important to them was that communication would be required to defeat the boss. And their feedback after the first week was as follows. When it comes to what went right, they were happy with the amount of coordination required, and I completely agree here, and they were also very happy with the amount of work that shot callers had to do. You can very much notice in this raid if your shot caller is good and experienced or not, because it can make or break the fight. For example, while I know the fight now, I would not feel confident shot calling it at this point yet. They were also happy with the ways that people filled the different roles, and also with people taking over the roles for others when somebody dies, which mainly refers to the pressure plates, but that is something that our raid group, for example, did. We had a secondary group for pressure plates in case one in the first group wasn't able to stand on it. Quick thanks to Roger, by the way, whose footage I'm using here, more detailed shout out at the end. Along with the things that went right, there were quite a few things that they wanted to improve. The first thing is the difficulty in itself. They say they want the challenging nature to be changed, and they're saying they're adjusting that for sure. So we can expect the difficulty to definitely go up in some ways. Beyond that, there were certain aspects of behavior that they want to adjust to kind of take into account some of the really good strategies that they were seeing. They don't want to prevent these strategies, but make them not as safe. I quote, "So as you see the boss transition into life, you're going to be seeing the Sandworm do some attacks and some abilities that are going to make some of those kinds of safe strategies a little more dangerous and a little bit more risky." So my prediction is that this affects two different things. On one hand, I'm very certain that they're talking about the melee clumping here, which is what made my footage relatively boring to watch, because it's very easy and safe to sit very close to the Sandworm with a lot of melee players and have very minimal risk overall, very little attacks that can actually significantly hurt you. So just adjusting those, for example, through adjusting the damage of the lick or adjusting what the adds around the Sandworm do, would already have a pretty significant impact on that side of things. On the other hand, there is also another strategy that was used that is a lot safer. It's also a lot slower, but very safe, which is just having a ton of bows sitting very far back and basically ignoring everything that's going on the ground. I am not sure if they want to tackle that mechanic as well, but I could see that happening. Maybe making the Sandworm spit at the upper areas more often if there are more players present or something. I think there are easy mechanics to solve that problem. Then again, at least so far, that strategy was a fair bit slower, meaning it is also going to be more risky anyways, because the Sandworm has gotten a fix to its empower mechanics, so that it affects the acid attacks it does as well. I didn't even know originally that it has this empower, but basically the longer the fight takes, the more empower it gets, which again is kind of rough for weaker, newer groups, but this would also prevent something that doesn't do enough DPS. Any strategy that's about slowing the fight down and dragging it out will get punished this way. According to the devs, the changes they're introducing require the player to adjust, regroup, and then charge back at the boss. So again, I think this is in particular the lick as well, where you just have to dodge away from the lick, go away to the side a little bit, and then go back into it. So I think this sounds great in itself. The strategies they saw on the PTR were also a lot different from what they had been testing, but they said it was cool to see players theorycraft here and figure out how to optimize the DPS and get those kills faster and faster. They said their execution was great, which is fantastic. It's more data for us. Let us make those adjustments. They actually complimented the people running and completing the raid a ton more, but I feel like it would be conceited to read all of that out. What I will say is a direct quote, which is, "I'm really excited to see how they react to these tuning changes and then carry that forward into a live environment." To me, this sounds like they are going to put another PTR phase out where we get to test these new changes, because they're saying they want to see how we react to the changes and then carry that forward into the live environment. So I am very much hoping that we'll see essentially at least a very similar version to what will be on live on the PTR in the next phase. We know there is at least one more PTR phase, because I think it would be very important to properly test it again to make sure everything is working as intended before live, so that the players that then return with live get a very good experience from the start. When asked what lessons they learned, they said beyond the typical stuff like base health and base damage values, they want to lean into requirements for players to roll debuffs or roll rends and weakens and make sure that's all kind of taken into account from day one. You may remember this was a very direct suggestion I made to them. I said that the Sandworm should have ideally a very high amount of Empower and of Fortify, so that you would need a lot of different weakens and rends in order to have him at a normal base level, because that encourages using a lot of different weapons instead of everyone going in with these same weapons, because it's easier to optimize DPS with a lot of spears, one rapier, a lot of bows and some void blades. What is not clear from this statement, because it's a lesson learned, is if this will be something they want to apply to the Sandworm, which would easily be possible because the Sandworm has that Empower mechanic. You could just add a Fortify to that and that would be all you need. Or if this is something they're just planning to do for future raids. They did also mention specifically that when it comes to lessons learned, they learned a lot about the flow of combat in a 20-person raid, which they also again link to the possible weapon variety in the raid, etc. It changes how they need to approach stuff in general. Outside of balance, they also talked a fair bit about the lore, something that I'm not going to do here because I feel like that just takes away from the Season 2 storyline a bit, because it's all kind of what the storyline in general explains, so I feel like it's more fun to experience that. And they also talked about how you prepare for the raid, which is finally having to use Beast Ward and Bane, along with acid tinctures as well as chitin padding. Now, hold that thought. We will see if that's actually the best option. On one hand, acid tinctures are so far more of a backup thing. They are good to have, a few of, for sure, but they don't feel strictly necessary yet, because right now the tuning of the Sandworm is such a way that you don't necessarily need them if you play everything right. And also I feel like in return what they should have mentioned instead is that you will need incense, because that is absolutely required if they make any sort of adjustments to the acid effect. Also, there is a possibility that for some players, Beast Ward or at least Beast Bane may not be the best option for all players. Depending on how they adjust things, there might be some angry Earth Ward or Bane that may be needed. Or at least maybe the coatings or ward potions or something along those lines. Again, all very early, depends all on how they change the balance, but I wouldn't be 100% set on the items they suggested here, because there are possible other options. There was also a community question asking what Sandworm mechanics you really enjoy and what you want to see from future raid content, and I think especially the future raid content question is one that ideally as many people as possible should answer, so that you'll be able to make your contribution to whatever the future of New World is. Before you head over to their channel, consider subscribing and clicking the bell if you haven't yet, so you get notified of upcoming Sandworm videos. I'm working on a guide that I will release before the Sandworm comes out. I'm just trying to see what changes we get on PTR so you can give you the most up-to-date version right before release. Also, thanks again to Roger for letting me use his footage. You saw some crazy DPS there. That was our only bleed rapier. I will link his channel down below, but also the summarized version of his rapier guide is still coming in the future. It's just something I had to push back a bit because of all the current content that's coming with the new patch. Thanks to my patrons for supporting this video. They are perfectly geared for the new patch because they got early trading tips for all of the stuff that you need to buy, and they should have everything at this point. And thank you for watching. Sloth out.